Well, Elise, we've talked about this in the past. The Armenian Genocide began in 1914 when the Ottoman Empire, which is now Turkey, began eradicating the Armenian people. 1.5 million Armenians, including women and children, were murdered. That was about 3/4 of the population at the time. My grandmother witnessed her own father, who was a priest, getting hung.
My grandfather was a priest in the old country, and he was one of the leaders, and he was called and for a special meeting among other important men from the village, and they were all beheaded. And the Turkish people didn't like the Christians, and so they planned to the genocide. And my grandparents had, I think, 13 siblings, and maybe about 4 or 5 survived. And that was sad. That was sad.
When the Turks came in, what they used to do is throw bread on the ground, and then they would stab the kids, My brother had,
Like Papa?
Yeah, there was a lot of scars on his legs too,
Yeah.
and that was a terrible thing, so that they couldn't walk even,
I mean, my parents didn't say anything what a hard life they had. They didn't like to talk about it too much, about the genocide, because it was too painful. And but I don't know too much about my dad. His mother and father died, a sister, and my father was hurt badly by the Turkish. He showed me his legs and his wounds and everything like that. He was a little boy when that happened, and they were on horses and they were just having fun or whatever it was, and they were hurting him.
The Turkish soldiers had a saying, "Don't waste a bullet on an Armenian, you can't reuse it. Instead, use an axe or a shovel." Many, if not most, of the men were murdered outright. The women and children were marched into the desert in a desperate attempt to survive. Many perished from starvation or dehydration along the way.
My brother and my mother were on a forced march from Averek to Deir Zor. Thousands of Armenians died on the way, and their bones are still, found here and there, all over Deir Zor. On the way, the Turkish soldiers used to confront them. My mother and 2 or 3 other young girls, were always approached by the Turkish troops. They stopped them. They raped, I don't know how many Armenians have been raped. So what my mother did was, there was a Kurdish farmer. She approached the farmer and she gave him a gold coin and said to him, "We are honored on this march to Deir Zor." She gave it to him. She says, "Please take care of my son, and I will send people back to get him." But when my mother finally found a person who sells coal between different cities, she gave him a gold coin also. So on his visit to the cities where my mother said he would be, he started yelling out, "Sarkis! Sarkis," And my brother heard him, you know, so he went running down, you know, and so the Kurd said to him, look, I've got coal here. I'm going to take out a portion. I want you to stay inside. I'm going to cover you. Finally, he got her to Deir Zor, and they met each other, you know, with my mother and my aunts and whoever else was there too. My father, they locked him up and put him in jail. And he was in jail for 1 year, a very small, you know, like a closet, like a cubicle. In other words, there was no seat. He stood up all day long. They said he really tortured. He says, I used to wait until the bugs used to climb up my legs, you know, and then I grabbed them and he used to tell me those stories.
My mother, Osniv, she had her younger sister and a brother. She held their hands and they were running. I don't know where they were and where they're headed towards. They came to a river where they had to cross, and she had her sister's hand and her younger brother on her shoulder, and she was trying to cross the river. And her sister got caught in the whirlpool and died. And that was one of the sad things I heard. And since then, she never wanted to go near any lakes, rivers, ocean, or anything. She just kept away from that. It was too painful for her. And then she came to Canada through the Red Cross.
They came to this country. By that time, I think my brother was around 16 years old. This was in 1919. They boarded an Italian cargo ship and they came to the United States. I have the boarding pass. My mother, she was recurring everything that was happening to them. You know, when like my dad, when he left them, she thought about those always had, you know, like I would speak to her and try to ask her some questions and things. Never answered me, you know, never wanted to talk about it. So anyway,
Show these beautiful pictures.
and what happened was she got shock treatment in those days. They used to give them shock treatment to try to get them to, you know, be alert. And then all of a sudden, she became unresponsive. You know, she was in bed, she didn't get out of bed, and she wasn't responsive. So the doctors came, they gave her injections, you know, to try to get her, and didn't help her.
Yeah.
I took Danny up there one day when he was a little boy, up there to see my mother.
I was, I guess, around 10 or 11. My father took me to see my grandmother at the institution where she had been hospitalized probably for the past 2 decades, maybe 3 decades. She was really abused, as I understood it, when she was in Armenia before she had immigrated. And she had been treated with horrible drugs. The early days of psychiatric medicine involved horrible drugs like stelazine and thorazine. And my recollection of it is just this long drive. And as we pulled up to the institution, I just remember this very bland brick building with just a bunch of undecorated windows, and was huge. And again, this is a boyhood recollection. Almost it reminds me of Shutter Island and just the imagery. And it gone a couple of times. One time I actually went inside and they wheeled my grandmother in, and she was somewhat, I would say, almost catatonic, very little movement. She smiled, didn't say very much that I can recall.
In 1937, I remember the date.
My father received a phone call, and I just remember how devastated he was by that. And you know, when you see your parent, your father, your mother hurting, it's just this helpless feeling as a child. There wasn't much I was able to do to console him.
Do you want to show us the photographs?
What? Excuse me.
Do you want to show us the photographs?
Yeah. My father and mother was on one of the visiting occasions. You know, we used to go there like once or twice a month.
Ask him about the porch. The other picture.
Do you want me to sit next to him? Do you want tissue?
I was a student at NYU.
No, she wants to know where we met.
Okay, I'm going to get to it. So I met Mike Alberian. We got to be buddies, and you know, we used to go to Armenian dances and things. We were standing around, who are we going to dance with? And so for which girl? So Mike says, see that girl over there? I want to go ask her to dance. I said, how can you do that? There's like 4 or 5 guys around her. So he says, I'm going to do it. So he went over to her and, you know, he asked her to dance. And she says, okay. About a couple of weeks later, he says, I'm going to Canada. You know, I want to see the family. And that's when he met you. And then when he comes back, he says, she's got a sister, you know.
My name is Shinore, actually, in Armenian. And my English name is Sheena, which I was given by my teacher at school because she couldn't pronounce my Armenian name. And I got stuck with it.
I named the Queen of the Jungle.
They would ask me, Sheena, you know, I said, yes, meet my Tarzan. And he was thin.
My name is, in Armenian, is Hike. When I was with American fellas and everything, they used to say, what is that, a disease?
A disease.
So, yeah, anyway.
He's a wonderful man. He spoiled me rotten. I'm telling him now, but I wouldn't tell him before. And I appreciate him. You can spoil me again and again and again. Yeah.
The Armenian Genocide. The Armenian Genocide is a very big thorn in the Armenian population, simply because the Turks created that genocide, and they don't want to accept that they were creating a genocide. They were blaming the Armenians for their political motivations and things. So that bothers me. That bothers me terribly.
The challenge, I believe, when they get into office is they're faced with the geopolitical issues and ethnic issues, with Turkey being a valuable ally in the Middle East. So it's always very difficult, and it's very, very difficult for my father to accept that.
You think we'll ever see that day?